Good evening, everyone. We'll wait for a few more people entering. Yeah, already a few. Okay. Good evening. Welcome everyone. I'm Aurora. I'm a new member of the transitions team, and this is my very first event. It's not the case for transitions because this is the third event, which is linked to the launch of a new issue. For those who did not attend any previous event and meeting, I would like to briefly present to you the project, our project of the journal. Transitions is a postgraduate journal of literary and linguistic disciplines, which are part mainly of the Master of English and Anglo-American Studies at Sapienza University of Rome. It is entirely run by students, ex-students who are now part maybe of the advisory board and other teams. Students, I was saying, that work together and cooperate with other people, including also international students and international guests and professors. Now I would like to start first of all with a very short video that I will comment on right after it ends. So I will leave you now to the trailer.
The Anthropocene is the time in the geological record when humans have moved the planet outside its natural limits.
Humans go from being participants in the whole Earth to being a dominant feature.
Dominating the oceans, the landscape, agriculture, animals.
It could be a full-scale catastrophic change.
We have not a way to get back. We live now in a different world.
It's such a fundamental change in the way the Earth is behaving, but we need to communicate that as powerfully as possible to everybody.
Okay, I hope the audio was better for you all than for me. But what you've just watched is the trailer of the documentary Anthropocene, the Human Epoch. This is a Canadian film released in 2018. It was described by the directors as a meditation, a cinematic meditation of humanity's massive re-engineering of the planet. The documentary is very, let's say, general. It touches on many aspects of the theme of the Anthropocene, and that's why I thought it was a good idea to watch it all together, just to get a general but clear idea what the topic is. Of course, we're going to talk about it from a more literary point of view than from a scientific point of view. But before starting, let me promote the reason why we are here. So the new issue of our journal, which is going to be available from the end of this event. Actually, you will have the chance to read it right after the event on our website, our WordPress website. The issue was curated by our two editors, Battiloro and Lorenzo Zannini. So now I can actually leave the floor to them, who are going to introduce the topic better than I would do for sure. So thank you, Asia, and thank you, Lorenzo. We are keen to listen to you.
Okay, thank you, Aurora. I hope you can all hear me well. So good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to finally be here with you today, since this means that the November issue is out and that we made it after months of hard work. For this reason, I would like to thank a few people. First, of course, Lorenzo Zannini, my friend, colleague, and the co-editor of the Anthropocene and Possible Futures. His contribution to the project and to the editing of this issue has been truly immense. So thank you again. Then I would like to thank Silvia Gatti, our editor-in-chief, but also the editorial team, the social team, the human resources team, and the production team of Transitions, because without them, we wouldn't be here today at all. So thank you, guys. And last but not least, I would like to thank our contributors. As Aurora just said, shortly, Lorenzo Zannini will present us the contributions to the issue. But before doing that, I would like to say a few words on the genesis of this issue. In the second semester of 2021, so after approximately 1 year since the first lockdown, I had the opportunity to attend Professor Mussgnug's masterclass on world literature and environmental humanities. Professor Mussgnug is, of course, today's special guest. We will hear from him shortly. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank him as well for accepting our invitation. So thank you. As I was saying, I had the chance to attend his masterclass where something really significant happened. And in order to explain what happened, I have to further go back in time. So basically, before the masterclass, I had spent the last months of my master's degree writing my thesis in a state of total seclusion, so total isolation. The same state of seclusion we all had to experience since the pandemic. And this was something that hit me hard because I had, and I still have today, an idea of what experiencing university life and experiencing research is, which is founded on sharing, on confrontation and discussion with peers. So I was missing out on all of that. I had imagined writing my thesis while sitting next to my colleagues in university, so in an environment that was always open to dialogue. But this was not possible at the time. And we all had to fall back on remote communication. So when I started attending Professor Mussgnug's masterclass, I had the chance of sharing ideas and research interests with the other students of the masterclass. Some of them are also here today. This was something that hadn't happened in a long time. But what made it so inspiring and stimulating to me had to do with the interdisciplinary potential that environmental humanities bear, and that I was discovering and finding out during those days of the masterclass. Basically, to me, The truly amazing aspect of that experience had to do with the fact that several people with very heterogeneous research interests had been easily brought together when they adopted an eco-critical perspective. And I believe that that feeling of renewed connection that I felt, that I experienced those days, was born out of what Donna Haraway calls thinking with. So when Lorenzo asked me to edit the November issue together with him, and we started thinking about a possible theme, we immediately thought that eco-criticism could be the best choice for different reasons. One of them had to do with the ethos of this journal. Transitions was born in a moment when we, when I say we, I'm referring to some students of the MA of English and Anglo-American Studies here in Sapienza, when we had no longer a physical space to share. But we still wanted to build a platform to encourage critical thought. So reasoning together on this absence of physical proximity that had been brought upon us by a global pandemic, which is of course somehow another manifestation of this sick relationship between humans and the earth, but also reasoning together on what the consequences of this loss of a physical space to share would have meant in terms of thinking with, seemed the necessary consequence. So this was possibly the main reason for this choice. We thought that the critical discourse around the Anthropocene would have allowed us to do so, to think with and about this aspect. But this would have also allowed us to build bridges across research fields, fostering interconnections among very different narratives. And this brings me to the other reason, which I must admit is not something that we thought about when we first came up with the call for submissions. But I believe it was already there. I'm referring right now to the potential of discussion and speculation around alternative futures other than the Anthropocene. This is something I realized a few days ago while I was listening to a podcast on the G8 of Genoa, a podcast by Annalisa Camilli, a journalist who works for Internazionale. For those of you who are not familiar with the G8 of Genoa, I believe I should somehow introduce it to you very briefly, although it is very difficult to talk about Genoa. There are too many aspects of those days and so many different voices that it would be impossible to give justice to all of them. And I have just a few minutes left to speak. But it will suffice to say that during the G8 that took place in Genoa in 2001, where the heads of state of the 8 most industrialized countries of the world met, in those days, there were huge protests. You may believe that what I'm saying right now is distant and has nothing to do with the launch of this issue, but it is not. It is not distant. In fact, among the various voices who were raised during those days of protests, among the various fights of the No Global movement, we find groups demanding environmental justice as well. So when I was listening to the last episode of the podcast, the discussion revolved around the importance of memories when it comes to history. And Annalisa Camilli referred to the importance of individual memories, oral testimonies, even though they might be distant from the idea we all have of what a historical true fact is. She says that without memories, without oral testimonies, we may start to believe that there is no alternative to the historical narration, which is imposed upon us. In case of the G8, the omission of these oral testimonies of the people who were there, who were the witnesses of those days, has led us to believe that the demonstrators of Genoa were nothing but perpetrators of violence. But they were not. Of course, this was the point that Camilli wanted to make, and I'm sorry for this big digression, but I needed this digression because I needed to make a point about the possibility of possible futures. Because I believe that Camilli was not merely talking about the past, but she was really making a point about the future. So basically, what memories and storytelling represent for the G8 of Genoa and for the retelling of a troubled past helps us understand what literature means for this issue of transitions. And more broadly speaking, for the climate crisis as well, and for the construction of possible futures. So today, I believe more than ever, we need alternatives, and literature has the potential to offer those alternatives. And I think that our contributors in this issue have tried to engage with the salvific power of literature. And I'm borrowing from Donna Haraway again here, because they actually are playing cat's cradle in this issue. So they are weaving together their thoughts as in a string game. I will now leave the floor to Lorenzo, but thank you so much for being here with us today and for your attention.
Thank you, Asia. First, I want to join the thanks made by Asia to all the people who contributed to the creation of this issue. And obviously, I want to thank Asia as a friend and a colleague for the incredible work she did on this issue and for the path we shared so far as colleagues at university and as friends, of course. Now I'll briefly touch upon the contents of the issue, and I'm going to share my screen so you can have a look to what's inside the Anthropocene and Possible Futures. This is the third issue of Transition, and as Aurora mentioned earlier, it will be uploaded to our website in a few minutes. You can check it out after this event. And before going to deep in the contributions, I want to thank all the staff of Transitions, the production team, the social team, the human resources team for the work they did in the last few months. And I also want to thank Rita Roccamo for the cover of this issue. As you may know, Transition is divided in 3 sections. We managed to have contribution for just 2 of them. So we have the first section that are academic writings, and we have 3 contribution that are somehow linked to each other. The first contribution comes from Evie Worsnap and explores the importance of landscape and the relations between human and nature, with a particular focus on the environmental crisis. And the aim of this paper is analyzing the centrality of landscape in the exploration of climate issue, and in the presentation of unstable natural worlds. So the way in which the reciprocal influence of human and nature impact on human ways of living. And as the author states, this paper and the analysis of morals and Jameson books wants to draw audience in self-reflection and try to reason on their relationship with nature and the environment. In a similar vein, Costanza Mondo discusses the importance of landscape in Katsuo Ishiguro, Clara and the Sun, with a particular focus on the multifaceted character of nature and in its interaction with the characters, as the title of the novel suggests. I won't dwell on this contribution more because it will be broadly discussed later with Professor Florian Mussgnug and the author of this paper. And the last contribution for our academic writing section comes from Paolo Dindinosante, which is our former editor-in-chief, so we owe a lot to him. And Paolo continues the Caparezza saga, we can say, in the journal, trying to analyze the eco-critical concerns explored in Caparezza's latest album, Exuvia, taking an ecomusicological approach to explore the role that nature and animals play in this multimodal macrotext which the album constitutes. You can have a little glimpse of the contents of this section. There are some excerpts from the contributions, and this is just to give you a sense of what you'll find in these contributions. Now we can move to the second section, the creative writing sections, and here we start with Caterina Napolitano with her piece of creative writing, which is the second part of a contribution that was originally published in our second issue, the July issue. So you can go check it out after this event. So you can just read the full story if you haven't already read it. We hope actually you've already read our July issue. And also this contribution will be discussed later along with Mondo contribution, so I won't dwell on this any longer. Then we move to Tommaso Natale, A Mysterious Man in a Rotten Land, which is a short story set in the 5th millennium and depicting a post-apocalyptic world. In this short story explores the two different perspectives on this imagined rotten words, and I think it draws the attention on the responsibilities that we have as a society in keeping a sustainable relationship with nature and the environment. And I think it's a great contribution. So I want to really thank Tommaso Natale for giving us the possibility to publish it. And in conclusion, we have Art of Lightness, which is a piece of poetry and is an intimate reflection on modernity's delusional quest for progress. It's brief but really intense. And so again, I want to thank also Andrea Lupi for this contribution, which surely enriched this issue. And then here you have again some excerpts from these contributions, just again to give you a sense of what's inside our issue. And in conclusion, here you have a glimpse of our foreword, in which we try to explain the reason that brought us to tackle the issue of the Anthropocene from this mainly literary perspective. Again, as you can see, we draw on Donna Haraway, which has been a great inspiration for us, and an incredible reading in these troubled times. So I think I can say we strongly suggest reading Haraway's contribution to this issue, because I think are really important and necessary somehow. I think I'm done with this presentation. I hope you're enjoying this event. Thank you for being here and sharing your evening with us. And I think I can give the floor to Aurora.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo, and thank you, Adi as well. Thanks a lot. We can maybe move on, and now let me introduce the special guest, let's say, of our event, because I'm very, very honored to have here with us tonight Professor Mussgnug. Good evening.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Good evening, Professor. I will briefly introduce you to everyone. Professor Mussgnug is Professor of Comparative Literature and Italian Studies at University College London, where he teaches also a course on global literature and the Anthropocene, which is what interests us the most. His fields of research include speculative fiction, posthumanism, and catastrophe and global existential risk, if I'm not wrong. So I will leave the floor to you directly, and thank you again.
Thank you very much, Aurora, and thank you all. It's a real pleasure to be here. I hope you can hear me all right and the connection isn't going to play any tricks. I just wanted to say how much of a pleasure it is for me to listen to your presentations, to see the special issue, and to think that perhaps you know, one of the many plants that are growing here and in this big creative tangle grew out of a seed which I planted last spring. You know, that's the kind of thing which really marks. I just sent a text message to my colleague and friend Yolanda Plescia, who's also in the audience, and said this is the kind of thing which makes our professions worthwhile. So I really, really appreciate that. As Asia has very kindly said, I was a visiting professor at Sapienza in spring, and had the chance to speak to quite a few of you who are here tonight over sort of 8 weeks or so, every week, and very much in the same way in which we're speaking today. It was virtual visiting professorship, so it doesn't feel very different now. Actually, it feels like I'm still in Sapienza somehow, or sort of back in Sapienza, which is very nice. So thanks a lot. Just a couple of things that I wanted to say. Firstly, you've really, I think, pinned down with a special issue some of the important contributions that arts and humanities disciplines can make to this hugely vital field of study. And I think, you know, you've proven the point, and it's a point which we all need to prove again and again and again, that we're doing much more here than simply providing effective forms of communication for or sort of translations of the knowledge that the scientists can provide. Of course, we do that as well, and this is an important part of our profession. But I also think that the contribution of the arts and humanities in a period of rapidly unfolding global environmental crisis is also very much precisely, as you say in the special issue, to invite our thinking, our speculative thinking around other forms of community, other forms of social organization, other possible worlds. So I think this is I think exactly it. So you asked me to say a few words about the Anthropocene as I imagine it. When I met some of you last spring for the doctoral seminars, I said that I tend to think of the Anthropocene as something which I sometimes call a transdisciplinary vector, meaning it takes you somewhere else. You know, you sort of start with a certain set of assumptions and a certain, hopefully a certain sort of core expertise that you bring to the debate, but this is never enough. So it's a wonderful field for people like me who enjoy talking about things which they don't fully understand yet, and to have lots of conversations with lots of different people, because you can't really, it's a sort of infinitely slippery and fascinating debate which I think we can't really pin down properly. A lot of it has to do with questions of scale. I think, you know, how closely we focus on some of the material foundations of our everyday lives, and the forms of companionship that are, you know, at the basis of our everyday lives, the forms of care that are the foundation of our everyday lives, or whether you sort of zoom back and you think of the fact that we inhabit this thin strata of life on a planet and in a universe which is something completely different, as for example Bruno Latour has done in his most recent book, again sort of on metamorphosis. So you sort of whether you think of the you know, the Earth system as a hyper object, like Timothy Morton has taught us. So it's very much a question of scale, but it's also a question of pronouns, and pronouns are very tricky, as Asia and Lorenzo remind us at the beginning of the introduction. You know, it's sort of we are all in this together. We're not all the same. So it's when we write about climate justice and environmental in the environmental humanities, situated interventions are very important, because all the knowledge practices that exist in this field, and all the ethical interventions and political interventions, I think, in my view, can only be ever imagined as situated interventions, right? So what does this mean? This means certainly that we have to be very cautious about anthropos in the Anthropocene. That you've all heard this before. You know, anthropos is a dangerous concept, because it's sort of, you know, worryingly close to the homo of sort of humanism and of heteropatriarchal tradition and of Eurocentrism. And, you know, when we think of anthropos, perhaps we are, not we in this room, but perhaps some of our scientists friends all too easily slip into old habits of thought and think of anthropos as male, white, able-bodied, powerful, etc. On the other hand, anthropos, and this is probably why I'd be really interested to hear why you're drawn to this concept of the Anthropocene. I mean, I would think that the anthropos in the term also has provides us with an opportunity to express certain forms of solidarity and care that we need. So, you know, the anthropos is problematic, but the anthropos is also the basis for the forms of sort of extended attention and care that we need. So we need to think about the global south in all this. Obviously, when we think of climate justice, we need to think about vulnerable groups. I also think, very interestingly, actually, that there is an emergent debate which is more attentive now to languages, to the multilingual Anthropocene. And I really enjoyed discussing this with you. Our discussions were in English, but of course many of you speak Italian. And one of the things which I find really fascinating as well is that there is a sort of debate now in Italy, which is sort of, it's a younger debate than the debate in the global Anglosphere, but it's a debate which, thanks to you and also thanks to others, such as sort of the Cantiere dell'Anthropocene in Pisa and sort of other groups, is emerging very, very quickly and very powerfully. There will be no doubt sort of ways in which the Italian debate will be distinctive and will be important. And I had a flavor of this during some of the conversations that I had with you. For example, I was writing a piece for a journal called Narrativa, and I was trying to sort of figure out how to write about speculation, as Donna Haraway defined, and had no idea how you would sort of translate speculation into Italian. So I texted the group, and Asia very kindly replied, I think after sort of 5.5 minutes, and sent me a whole glossary of sort of, you know, a Haraway dictionary in Italian. So thinking across and between languages is very important. Again, not just because we need to be able to communicate research findings, It's not just knowledge dissemination, it's always this kind of sort of, when we open something to a different language, we open something to a different world, and things begin to look differently there. So I'm really, I could go on and on and on, but I won't, don't worry, but I just want to, sort of, there are a lot of terms which are central to the debate in English, which also resonate in some of your contributions from what I've seen. For example, the question of scale, as I said, speculation, the very idea of sort of fiction or sort of possible worlds. And if you translate them into Italian, for example, they begin to look a bit different. So scale, for example, scala in Italian is a very technical term. If you want to say, we never had a meeting on this scale, or we never really discussed the problem on this scale, you wouldn't use correct me if I'm wrong, but you wouldn't sort of use the term scala in Italian. So in English, the way that the term scale has been focusing as a focalizer in debates about the Anthropocene, for example, in Timothy Clark's work, where he talks about sort of multi-scalar literacy, that would need to be not just translated, but rethought in Italian. So I think you are amazing, basically, as a group of young researchers, because you're right at the, you're very lucky, I think, also to be sort of at that important stage when you are very much collectively taking forward a discussion which is new and which is urgent, politically urgent, existentially urgent, also intellectually urgent. And I would really urge you to sort of continue, because it's clearly producing a lot of interesting results already. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thanks a lot. It was exhaustive, and I hope the public also has by now a clear idea of what we are talking about what the issue will be. I now want to welcome our two other guests, Costanza, Mondo, and Caterina Napolitano. They contributed to the issue of the journal with their works. So we have the chance now to hear directly from them a few more words about these works. And one is a piece of creating writing shop, and another one, sorry, it's not a shop, a piece of creative writing, and the other is an article about a novel. I'd like to address my first question to Caterina. Welcome, Caterina. Thanks for being with us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
For your time and for your contribution. I think I will leave you again, carte blanche, as French people say, to talk about your piece of creating writing. And yeah, we're keen to hear this.
Thank you. I'll be very brief, because the story itself is not that long, also because it's just part 2. So to actually have a full understanding of what is going on, you actually have to read part 1 as well, which is in our previous issue. But yeah, I'll be making it brief. It's a story about a creature. I will be calling him like that, because to call it a robot, it will be very reductive, because it's not just a robot, he's something other than the robot. And I think that it's actually the main reason why the story has been liked by our editors of the issue as well. And it's basically a journey, a very short journey, because it's only in 2 parts and a maximum of 6 pages. So it's not something lengthy. It's a brief journey, but it's the moment that it counts, and it's some sort of epiphany. It's a moment of epiphany. It's a moment of revelation for the main character, and it's about finding something extremely important about yourself, and to defy the nature of what you are. I will not be saying much because it's a spoiler, so I invite you all to read the story and see for yourself, so that I will not ruin the experience for all of you. But yeah, it's sci-fi.
Yeah, I'm sure people will enjoy the reading. Why do you think, Caterina, that the editors, Asia and Lorenzo, have decided to include the second part of your piece in this section rather than in the miscellaneous section?
Mainly because it's all written in the foreword that both Asia and Lorenzo wrote for the issue, and they talk a lot about challenging humanity, challenging what humanity left as a byproduct of their basically living or existing in the planet. And the whole story is about defying, first of all, in the first part, so in part one, it's the machine that defies the machine. But in part two is the machine that defies the human. So it's actually a challenge for both the creature, as then again, not a robot, against himself. So he is actually achieving a conscience for himself, which is, the pinnacle of AI achievement, because no machine is sentient, no machine knows that they are machines, but the moment they actually start to understanding who they are and what they are achieving through AI. And all the sci-fi nerds in the audience will be on board with this. But yeah, so it's a challenge. The machine, the creature is challenging a lot of, what can I say, stereotypes, concepts, and the machine is willing to forsake its machineness in order to achieve humanness. But then again, it's not that much human because it's still a machine, more like this. So it's a process, it's a challenge, and I think that this is why my story has been added in the creative writing section and not in the miscellaneous.
Sure. We actually also found that a big part of your piece was played by the role of defamiliarization. And so my question is, do you use defamiliarization to provoke the audience reflections on their relationship with the non-human, with the environment, with the non-animistic, let's say?
Sure. I mean, I wrote the piece to make all the readers a bit uncomfortable with the topics that are faced in it. I mean, probably only Elon Musk wouldn't be uncomfortable with it. And if Mr. Elon is in the audience, I'm open to questions.
Thank you.
But yeah, my biggest point was to have the reader read the story and start to wondering, what if? The what if is the biggest question here. What if humans started behaving in a certain way? What if humans started producing a kind of, technological device that in the long run would have been able to get some kind of feelings, some kind of ability to think for itself? It's like basically, what if Siri becomes able to feel? And it's a challenge, and it's what I want to provoke in the reader. So totally, absolutely.
You just made me think about a movie from 2013, Her. I mean,
yes, I loved it.
Really?
One of the yes, it's one of the influences.
Yeah, thank you very much, Caterina. Thanks a lot. We will go back to you in a while. I also want to introduce Costanza Mondo, the other author. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, you were just frozen for a while.
Okay.
So Costanta, you wrote an article which was based on the dystopian science fiction story entitled Clara in the Sun, written by the Japanese naturalized British author Kazuo Ishiguro. You wrote it from an almost eco-critical point of view. So what do you think about it? Tell us more.
Okay, yeah. My essay is concerned with the relationship between characters and nature in Clara and the Sun, Kazuo Ishiguro's latest novel. And it's actually a very interesting novel. So while I was reading it, I was struck by the number of natural traits and features which lie somewhat in the background the whole narration, but then they do pop up in pivotal scenes or meaningful passages of the novel, meaningful especially for characters. So in my essay, I really wanted to understand how much these natural traits are entwined with characters' memories and identities in this novel. And what's more, these natural features are observed from a brand new perspective, I would say, because the narrator is actually an android, it's Clara. And so she sees things differently, not only literally because her view is divided in boxes, but she has also different points of view. She sees things, as I say, from a different perspective. And sometimes her viewpoints are radically different from human beings. So, for example, her relationship or her attitude actually towards the sun is an example of paramount importance. So on the one hand, human beings ignore the sun or they marginalize it, they even despise it sometimes. And on the other hand, Clara has a very tender relationship, very respectful relationship towards this natural feature, which is particularly important. And its name is even capitalized, so it really becomes almost a character in the novel. And the sun is, well, we might say that it is seen from two perspectives. He's both wrathful and tender, so it also reminded me of William Blake's ambiguous vision of God as portrayed in Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. So my article also explores this possible connection. On the other hand, natural traits, as I was saying, are deeply connected with characters' memories and identities. So I really wanted to explore some of them. For example, the waterfall is an example, a capital example as far as memories are concerned, because it's a physical place which has the power to awaken memories in one of the characters. And we have to say these are painful memories related to her past. And the waterfall itself takes on different meanings. So I was really interested in, well, analyzing the issue of memories, but also the possible meanings of the waterfall as a physical place. And as for identities, there are other natural traits which portray not only the identities of characters, but most interestingly, also the identity of the dystopian society portrayed by Ishiguro, which is particularly lonely and divided. And so also the landscape mirrors this. So of course, Clara and the Sun, I mean, it's a novel rich in features, so it can be analyzed from different perspectives. And there are many themes, but I really wanted to read the novel through this thread, through this lens, and see the possible meanings of the landscape and how they interact with characters. So especially because we're talking about Anthropocene, and the relationship with nature is more ambiguous and it has changed. So yeah, I use this perspective. And I hope you'll enjoy it.
Yes, I hope the public will enjoy this one as well, for sure. I think you picked up a really good novel to analyze from this point of view. It, as you said, full of hints to be included. I want to talk about one more thing with you, to discuss Evie Worsnop's also contribution, wherein she states that actually science fiction and fantasy can invite the readers to think about the relationship with the environment. This is what this is actually a delicate thing, because often science fiction and fantasies, dystopian fantasies, are actually criticized for the opposite, that is distancing the reader from the real world environmental issues and from the real world problem. What do you think? What's your opinion? Is Evie Worsnop right, or does the read? that the dystopian novels will distance the reader from the real world.
So it's an interesting issue and also an interesting point to make. I have to say that I absolutely agree with her. So I think that fantasy, dystopias, but also cli-fi and sci-fi can actually help us to better understand environmental issues and therefore also our relationship towards environmental problems. So, for example, Clara and the Sun belongs to the sci-fi genre and it portrays a dystopian society. But on the other hand, the environmental issues depicted in its pages are particularly current. And I think that we as readers are familiar with them, so we can relate with these events and we can also reflect on our relationship towards them. So it might spur fruitful reflections. And I think that the perspective really makes a difference. So I'm really fond of Clara because she's an android. So as I was saying, she can give us new perspectives and also, well, due to the fact that sometimes her points of view are radically different from human beings, well, she might also induce us to reconsider our stance towards environmental issues. So there is an important example, which is the theme of air pollution, which is, of course, an environmental issue tackled in the novel. And I think that we are very familiar with it because, unfortunately, it's very widespread. So Clara hates pollution. Again, she describes air pollution from her view, divided in boxes. So she sees the coatings machines, and these are machines used for street maintenance, actually, which spread and release the thick clouds of smoke. And these clouds are so thick that sometimes even sun rays cannot pass through. So Clara is solar powered, by the way, so she hates pollution. And not only does she hate it, and this is something not to be taken for granted because human beings, by contrast, tend to accept pollution as a necessary evil, or, well, they don't relish it, of course, but they don't take action against pollution. Well, not only does Clara hate pollution, she also acts against it. She really tries to rein it in and she wants to accomplish emissions. So she's very committed. She becomes a sort of activist, and this is particularly interesting because she's not human, of course. And so this made me think, for example, about my relationship. This difference between human beings' attitudes and Clara's are particularly noticeable. So I think that we as readers have many things to learn from Clara. But there are other aspects in the novel as well which might set readers thinking. For example, the end where Clara is actually thrown away. But, well, for instance, she's not being recycled or properly disposed of. Artificial friends are cutting-edge technology, but they do contain chemicals which might be polluting to the environment. There is actually an important passage in the novel where Clara has to donate part of a liquid behind her head. So we would expect artificial friends to be recycled or properly disposed of, but this does not happen. And I mean, of course, artificial friends do not exist in real life, but other devices do exist, and sometimes their components are not properly recycled. For example, cell phones and batteries. So it really set me thinking about my stance on these issues. So yeah, I think that Clara and the Sun in particular, but also other genre, cli-fi, for example, and other dystopian fantasies might actually be extremely important to better understand our relationship towards environmental issues.
And I totally agree with you, and I'm also on this side of the argument. I think consciousness, environmental consciousness, plays an important role in the reading about whatever novel. So especially Clara and the Sun, where you said this is quite evident. Professor, you're still with us.
Yeah, I'm still here.
I'd like to know your thoughts on this question as well. Do you think fantasy is a good way to engage with the environmental crisis, or is there the risk that it could distance people from the real world, as I was saying before? You can maybe talk about your latest studies or have contribution.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very happy to talk. I'm very happy to talk about the discussion here rather than sort of drawing from other work. And I think it's really it's interesting. One thing that I noticed when I was reading the material that you sent, Aurora, is that a lot of the contributions, including the two sample chapters that I read in preparation, which are the two that we're discussing today, so Costanza and Caterina, are focused on what we might call sci-fi or SF or speculative fiction, and of course Evie's work. Evie's also a student of mine in London, so I was very pleased to see that she contributed. But Evie's chapter also focuses on this, and there seems to be a sort of strong sense that this is something that emerged from your individual reflections rather than something which you kind of sort of decided. So it's interesting that you make the connection as a group. Anthropocene speaks particularly powerful through particular genres. And yeah, I mean, I think it's an opportunity, as so often, you know, it's an opportunity and potentially also a risk that we take. I mean, the risk is that we end up ring fencing debates, I think, and that we kind of sort of we get bogged down in discussions about whether something is or isn't an example of a particular genre, which I think is, you know, that some of the best some of the best work on sci-fi from Darko Suvin onwards is work on, you know, whether something counts as sci-fi or not, whether something counts as fantasy or not, and you know, what defines sci-fi. And you know, these are all extremely interesting and extremely erudite discussions, and yet they only help us probably that much, because what we are most interested in, as you said just now, I mean, I couldn't have said it any better at all, is, you know, how these things speak to our own situation. That's what interests us. You know, we're interested in the fact that they expose something which is already happening to us now, not that they are imagining some remote future or some blueprint of a different society. So I think sort of probably, I mean, to be honest, if you ask me, some of the most interesting aesthetic experiences in this have to do with the fact that the boundaries between these genres are porous, that we can't really pin them down, and it's not all that interesting to pin them down, you know. So I don't know if you think of something like Jenny Offill's book Weather. That's, you know, people talking about their anxiety over climate change in the now in a very kind of sort of intimate, personal way. That's cli-fi. I mean, there's no future scenario at all, but it's very clear. If you think it's about the climate crisis, that's a very good example of cli-fi. So cli-fi isn't really just speculative fiction, and I think analytically, the most interesting work that we can carry out is probably when we can sort of explore relations between speculation and our experience now. So I probably haven't answered your question at all, Aurora, but that's what I would say. It's sort of, I would think of genres as relational constructs rather than thinking in terms of you know, rigid definitions or classification.
Sure. Yeah, it's not a dichotomy, yes or no. It's also, I think, as I was saying before, our own consciousness. I think first environmental education will change our perspectives, and then linking this to literature and to our studies and along with other humanities. Talking about our relationship with, the relationship between literature and the climate crisis, since you were mentioning cli-fi, Carla Benedetti, an Italian critic, wrote in a recent book that literature, according to her, will save us from extinction. This is, according to me, a very strong statement and probably a provocative one. She says that literature and philosophy and other humanities are the only way probably to enrich us and to teach us, emphasizing with the earth, and then probably think about future inhabitants, or why not other inhabitants, we don't know. So what you all think about it, I'd like to open a discussion with all of you, because it's very delicate. You can raise your hand or just talk.
Shall I say something to start to sort of, I won't say much in this, but just because I know Carla Benedetti, and I had the chance to discuss this with her. I think what is really interesting about her book is, and where I would sort of agree with her, is that she invites us to think of the Anthropocene as particular cultural dominant in our own age. And obviously that's a completely different definition of the Anthropocene from the one that the scientists work with. Because if you look at the Commission for Stratigraphy, which defined the beginning of the Anthropocene, they were looking at different hypotheses, and including 1870, including and in fact the one that I think won in the end, won in inverted commas, is 1945, right? So, but you talk about the Colombian, I mean, my UCL colleagues, Mark Maslin and his team talk about the Colombian exchange, for example, as the sort of start date of the Anthropocene. So the so-called discovery of the Americas. And what Carla Benedetti does really well in that book, I think, is to sort of remind us that the Anthropocene may have been with us for a long time, but the cultural awareness of the Anthropocene and the aesthetic response to that cultural awareness, that's a sort of new thing, right? That sort of happened over the course of your lifetime, so lasted 20 years or so, and not long before then. And I think that's really, so in that sense, that's a really interesting and important idea that she expresses very well in the final chapter of that book. Whether literature can save us, I don't know. I'll hand that on to somebody else, that question.
Caterina, what do you think about it?
I would like to take on the ball that Professor Mussgnug just threw about literature saving the world or saving us from extinction, because I actually think that apart from being an extremely powerful statement, I think that, in my personal opinion, obviously, it might be true, but if we can, let's say, contextualize it to what we've been living, we are still living nowadays. For example, the pandemic experience. If I write a piece and I talk about, let's say, problems that are connected to the climate, to my personal experience of the climate change, or even of the pandemic as well, I am exposing my feelings and my problems and my concerns to the world. And somewhere in the world, someone will be reading my piece of literature, and they will relate and resonate with my problems, with what I think, and probably that person will be thinking, I am not alone, and they will feel, some kind of connection through literature. And I think that that particular way is the way in which literature will save us from extinction. We can add also the aesthetic importance of literature as well, the importance of beauty, and then we will have Dostoevsky saying that beauty will save us all. But, that is another...
We'll have to do another event on aesthetic question. a new entire event, a new issue. Why not?
Maybe. Let's hope so.
Yes. Costanta, what you think? Literature, of course, we've understood it's a tool for connection, a tool of educating people, of course. What do you think it will be the role of literature in the future, maybe?
Well, yeah, I agree with Caterina. Literature is extremely relatable. So every piece of literature is different and unique, and it can appeal different people all over the world. And what's more, it engages us emotionally. And this can be used, for example, to induce us to take action, or at least maybe to slightly alter our behavior. I mean, starting from small actions. Of course, environmental issues are huge and they're very difficult to solve. But maybe with cooperation, I think that literature could spur changes. And yeah, so I don't know whether it will save the world, but it can definitely make the difference for the better. And I recently read, for example, Serenella Iovino's book. It's entitled Ecologia Letteraria. And she states that environmental ethic actually tries to use culture to solve the environmental crisis, which is seen as rooted in a cultural crisis. And of course, literature is a kind of culture. So I think that it can be used to raise awareness and so to tackle environmental issues, and by raising awareness, creating cooperation, of course, and maybe, inducing us to reconsider our action. So yeah, in that sense, yes, I suppose.
Agree, totally. And I see Professor saying yes as well. What I like about this theme is that, as Professor Mussgnug was saying at the beginning, it's very interdisciplinary. And nowadays, okay, it has not just started, but it is developing. So there's still a lot to say, a lot to discover and debate. I'm thinking of aesthetic philosophy, of course, will play an important role. He mentioned Bruno Latour, and he was actually stating that we've never been modern, so we have to think on this statement. It is now an hour or so we are talking. I'd like to talk also with the participants and the guests, the public. So if you have any questions, there's time for some questions. So please raise your hand if you want to ask something to any of the guests, or just if you have suggestions or any other issue to raise. I just ask you to say the name of the person you would like to address the question, not to create confusion. We will be all together on the screen, so we can chat as if we were in presence somewhere all together. Professor Yolanda Flecha, good evening, and thank you first for being here with us tonight.
Hello, hi.
Good evening.
Everyone. Thank you so much for this. Good evening. This was absolutely fascinating. And I'm not an expert at all on this. I've begun to think a bit about these things, thanks to Florian as well. So I'm exactly experiencing his work as the students are in the same way. One question I keep grappling with is this. I mean, I feel that on an emotional level, sorry if this might become personal, I really resonate with the idea that literature will save the world and beauty will save the world. At the same time, I have difficulties in overcoming the idea of consciousness. You may have talked about this already, but the thing is that isn't this all what we are experiencing within human consciousness? And so how can we speak of a world in which, if we're overcoming the human, how, you see what I'm trying to get at? How will we know outside of our consciousness, what the world will be like? And do we need to kind of abandon ourselves to this to this idea. So I feel the pull, the fascination. At the same time, I can feel my strong anthropocentric mindset probably reacting against the idea that there can be a world outside of human consciousness. This is probably a very basic general question that all of the thinkers have been grappling with, because it's just, to me, it's just the first step to begin to think of a world, you know, beyond the anthropocentric measure. And again, just as a provocation, I would ask, in the moment that we say that literature will save the world, or that we hope that literature will save the world, isn't literature one of the most anthropocentric endeavors in the world? I mean, isn't this in itself very human-centered? Because literature is a product of humans, or maybe not. I don't know. We've been studying, you know, the ways animals communicate. So who knows, maybe one day we will learn that there is a literature outside of human consciousness. But I'm sorry, these are very general and maybe useless questions, but as somebody who's just looking at this problem for the very first time over the past few months, I wonder if Florian or any of you have any thoughts.
Who wants to go first? I'd love to darei la precedenza a qualcuno degli autori, ma I'm happy to answer if you.
I think you ought to answer first. Then we will jump on the train.
Okay, I'll build a very small train, Caterina, and then we'll see. I think so. It's a really good question. It's obviously a huge question, Yolanda, but I mean, you like huge questions. So, you're not making it easy for us, right? So that's. I think the way that the way that I would understand the debate, the political impetus of the environmental humanities is not to overcome the human, but to decenter the human. So it's about sort of thinking beyond mastery rather than thinking beyond humanity. You know, there are sort of more radical forms of antinatalism, which would, you know, say that it's possible to imagine the world, you know, it's possible for us to imagine a world without us. And, you know, people have written about this. There is a sort of a South African philosopher called David Benatar who's written about this, who's really interesting from a sort of analytic philosophy perspective. In my view, it becomes very, very difficult to think of value once you kind of sort of try and sort of move beyond the human. I also think in a sort of slightly more concrete way that any form of care that we can imagine, planetary care, needs to still factor in the human. I mean, we love the planet, at least, you know, I'm not capable of loving the planet without loving it also through my imagining it as a habitat for other humans, right? So, I mean, even more concretely put, I've got 3 children, right? So it's very difficult to think about this without, you know, if once you have children, it's very difficult to think about this in a way which doesn't sort of want to avoid extinction, right? You want to decenter mastery, but you want to preserve some form of the human. And in fact, even Haraway, who's, you know, notoriously, you know, written, as Asia knows, written, make kin, not babies, right? Even Haraway sort of thinks in that that wonderful thought experiment, which is the Camille Chronicles, she's not imagining a world without the human, but she's imagining a world in which the human is sort of radically entangled and decentered over in deep time, right? To the point of being no longer recognizable as a sort of separate species. And I think probably Carla Benedetti would sort of ultimately sympathize with this. I mean, a very different way of thinking about all this is to, you know, what you would, who mentioned Elon Musk earlier? Caterina, I think you did. Transhumanism, you know, which is sort of, you know, the idea of kind of sort of empowering forms of intelligence and to, you know, possibly artificial intelligence to achieve even greater levels of mastery and agency, that's very different, I think. So yeah. Rosi Braidotti, for example, teaches that. Rosi Braidotti teaches that you know, you can be a humanist, but not anthropocentric, which is where I'd ideally like to be, I think. But you can also be an anti-humanist or a transhumanist and be very much interested in this sort of idea of mastery of the Anthropocene, which is where Elon Musk and his mates are, right? When you build this kind. So I don't know whether I've answered, but I think it's you know, what the question was, you know, sort of where would the literary fit? I would say that the literary fits in this kind of sort of humble, entangled form, but it still lingers in the system. It sort of reverberates. Otherwise, you know, for me, it's very difficult to imagine any sense of futurity. Sorry. Caterina, that's the train. Now, over to you and to everybody else.
I'm going to jump. I actually think that what Professor Mussgnug said is, I resonated with it a lot, because I also think that the point of the, let's say, possible future is just not to deprive the human of its consciousness, but to actually build, again, something that can go around the fact that human consciousness needs to stay there, because no machine can reproduce anything that a human can do with feeling. Let's say, I believe in something called the spark or the talent. I mean, a machine can perfectly reproduce the Mona Lisa, but it cannot create something like the Mona Lisa on its own. And I think that the kind of plus valor, as Marx would call it, is irreplaceable by the humans. But the mastery, as Professor Mussgnug called it, can be replaced. I mean, 50 years ago, no one would have thought that industries would rise. Lots of work, lots of jobs that we don't do anymore because machines do, weren't possible to think that something other than a human could do. So actually, I think that all that is connected to the art and to feelings as well cannot be deprived of the human component. So I don't think there will be the possibility of a world existing without even a small glimpse of humanness inside of it. So yeah, I'm now on board on the train. I'm just seeing where it goes.
Okay,
that's really helpful. Thank you both. That's really helpful. It does help.
I think Asia's got her hand up as well.
Yeah. I will go after Costanza if she wants to add anything to the discussion.
Okay, my microphone. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to tell something about literature and the fact that is it anthropocentric or not? I found it very thought-provoking, actually. And I have to say that, yeah, in a sense, it's very anthropocentric because, well, it's based on human emotions and actions, and I suppose it's part of its allure, in a sense. But it's also true that humans are causing much damage to the environment. And I mean, many environmental issues actually derive from human actions. So it might also be used as a tool, let's say an anthropocentric tool, to solve the issues and tackle these problems, maybe. And there are some works, eco-critical works, I suppose, which are also trying to put the stress on animals, for example, and give them voice. So to shift subjects. So yeah, at least this is in my opinion. But I found it very interesting to think about it, an interesting reflection.
Yes, I just wanted to say a few, to add a few points to the discussion and to touch the different things that were raised. And I wanted to start with Professor Plesha's question, which is actually the question that Lorenzo and I decided to tackle in our foreword. So when you will read that, you will actually realize that we thought about it, because we thought, oh my gosh, we need to settle this thing first. And we didn't settle it because it's not a problem we can solve, of course. We just try to speculate on it based on the research that was already done. We talked about consciousness, and we wanted to write a foreword to this issue that could at least make an effort to try and engage with a concept of consciousness that could be shared other than personal and individualistic. So in opposition with that kind of, idea of the individual self in a world where capitalism, is constantly asking you, okay, you need to do your own thing to be just yourself and you will be just fine, which is, something not true. It's just something that we're fed with. So we reasoned about it, and we thought that Timothy Morton's idea of consciousness, based on climate change, so on this hyper object of climate change, could help us reason about this a little bit more. And he talks about us being but litmus tests of the hyper object of climate change, which is very, very interesting, because there is this idea of how we reflect the hyper object of climate change. So this was our first attempt to build this different kind of consciousness that takes into account other than humans as well, not just the human being. And also the fact that we are writing about this, even if we have our limitations, because we are humans, it's still something that adds to the problem, that fits the problem, even if it doesn't solve it completely. And to what we said about, what you said about animals is actually very interesting. And I think Michael Cronin is working on this, and he is actually theorizing about this issue and trying to come up with possibilities. And he said something very interesting, actually, that in a few years we might be able to translate the language of animals, which is gonna be actually great. It's gonna add so much, and it's gonna actually probably solve the problem that we have of control over nature, because nature doesn't have the power of speech, which will solve this kind of solve. I mean, I'm saying the word solve improperly. I have no idea actually of what is going to happen, but it is something we need to consider and take into account. And I will say one last thing, which concerns and has to do with Carla Benedetti, because I think she writes something very interesting about our limitations as human beings, because we, I believe she uses Noah as an example. How did Noah try to convince humans that the end of the world was forthcoming? And she says that he probably didn't make it because he didn't have a good enough narrative. Didn't give them a good enough narrative to convince them, to empathize. And she uses, of course, the example of what about if we start thinking about future generations and start picturing what is going to happen in the future. Maybe this is going to help trying to build narratives that reflect that kind of alternative future. And the debate is ongoing, because of course there's a fringe that actually says that we cannot think in terms of children, because that excludes a part of the population who does not want to have children, or perhaps cannot have children. So what do we do with these people? How do we convince them at that point? So it's a very interesting debate that is ongoing.
Can I just add, well, thank you all. This was all really great food for thought. Some of you may know that I translated Virginia Woolf's Flush recently. And that book really got me thinking, because that's the whole point, you know, that Woolf has this whole project of deconstructing biography with a capital B, so telling the lives of great men. You remember the historian Carlyle, who says that history is but the lives of great men. Nobody knows what happens to women, children, animals, etc. So when Woolf decides to tell the story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, she does it through the eyes of her dog, Flush. And that was an eye-opening experience for me to translate that text. And what you've all said today really made me think that I wish I had heard this seminar before translating. I mean, I might have taken some different decisions, because there is a lot of anthropomorphization going on there. I mean, Flush in the end is like a human being. I mean, obviously we can't ask, you know, everything to be done in a flash, right? So Woolf decides to deconstruct, decenter the idea of biography. She turns to the animal. I think she writes a delightful book, but still Flush is very humanized. So we can't, you know, do the whole process so quickly. So, I mean, that's probably to be expected, right? But the real interesting book now would be for Flush to speak his own language and not the language of humans, and for us to be able to understand something. That would be fantastic. But thank you all. This was really, really great. And thank you for your work on the issue as well.
Thank you. Probably Lorenzo would like to say something as well, if it was not a mistake. Yeah, with us.
Thank you. I just want to add a little thing. Just will take a couple of minutes. I think that this tangle, obviously, as it emerged from all the contribution we had so far, cannot be solved entirely within literary criticism. It is impossible, as Professor Mussgnug was saying before. A transdisciplinary approach is needed to tackle this the issue of the Anthropocene or Cthulhucene, Capitalism, or whatever label one can apply to this historical period that for someone goes back to the invention of the steam engine, for some other goes further back to colonialism. So this just to say that transdisciplinarity is needed to tackle this issue historically and politically, which I think are the two aspects that are often overlooked in the literary debate. Also the division between nature and culture, the cleavages between nature and culture, the separation of nature and culture also involves the separation of the natural sciences and the social sciences and the humanities. So an effort is needed to try to, for academics, young scholars, young researchers, undergraduates and postgraduates, whoever, to try to, let's say, holistically address this issue without any limit, and think beyond disciplinary boundaries, and really try to make an effort to go back in time, also beyond the limits that we already have. For example, Jason Moore goes back to colonialism, 16th century, and so on. I think we all have to make an effort and try to not just try to solve the riddle within our discipline, but trying to do this transdisciplinary effort. And this issue also wanted to foster this kind of reasoning from a one-on-one perspective. We are not scholars, we're just postgraduate students, no more students, but we just finished our, let's hopefully first academic part of our life. And just to remark this thing, I think that this issue must be taken historically and politically.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Yeah, I think this is the point. When you were talking about decolonization, you made me think about Stefania Consigliere. She's an Italian anthropologist from the University of Genova. And she wrote a book which is called Favole del Reincanto, Fables of the Reenchantment. She states that modernity actually started with the decolonization, or maybe even before. But that's my suggestion, reading suggestion. I would like to ask maybe an article or a book, a novel, to the guests, or even from the public, if you want to say something or suggest something to us as well. Maybe Professor will start again just with the title of any of your article of your works.
I'm not going to suggest my own work. Come on. Let me think. This is interesting. I don't know. I'd love to hear what others say. Reading suggestions.
Sure, please. For sure, we're going to read Clara and the Sun, for those who didn't.
I recommend that. Yeah. So as I say, I personally recommend Ecologia Letteraria by Serenella Juvino, because it's really an interesting book, and for me was an eye-opener as far as eco-criticism is concerned. And also another one, it's actually on academic writing. It's entitled The Great Derangement by Amitav Ghosh. And I think it's very interesting because it deepens the topic of environmental issues, awareness, and literature and culture as well. So, and I found it particularly inspiring. So, and I recently read Amitav Ghosh's works. So yeah, I also like his novels. So these are my reading suggestions for you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm afraid we reached the end of our virtual meeting. Am I right? I guess yes. The public probably want to go have dinner by now. So I really want to thank you, Asia and Lorenzo, firstly, and of course, Professor Florian Mussgnug, for dedicating your time. Thank you very much, and your precious words. Caterina and Costanta, for sure, and also Yolanda Flescia, Professor. She's also our tutor, and I'm really happy she came here today. So thanks for your presence. Lastly, I want to say thank you to a person who's in the shadow today, but who actually organized everything with me and did an amazing job as a tutor. And he's the former event manager, Leonardo Bagnolo. So thank you, Leo, for your teaching. And well, I want to remember the public that you can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook, that the issue is now available, should be now available on our website, therefore go read it after dinner. And also be aware that our call for applicants are often open, so please get in touch with us and contact us in our email. I can maybe copy and paste it for you in the chat, so you can all have it. Here you go, eaa@transitions@gmail.com. And I guess that's it. So thank you very much again, everyone. I really enjoyed my first event, and I hope you'll be present to the next and the next and the next. And thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.